The night air clung to the streets like a damp shroud, wrapping the city in silence broken only by the hum of distant traffic and the occasional flicker of a street lamp fighting to stay alive. Officer Elena Morales adjusted her patrol jacket and pulled it tighter around her shoulders as she stepped from her cruiser. The winter had crept in early this year, the kind that burned the lungs and bit through layers. She hated nights like this. The ones where shadows seemed to swallow sound, where loneliness echoed louder than sirens. But duty was duty, and Elena had always promised herself she would walk into the silence, even when the silence frightened her. It was near the edge of the old industrial district, a place the city had forgotten years ago. Crumbling warehouses loomed like skeletons against the starless sky. The kind of place where people disappeared, not always in ways that made the headlines. Elena had pulled over because she'd caught a glimpse of movement, something slumped near the steps of a boarded-up factory. At first, she thought it was just a pile of rags left behind. But then it shifted. A faint cough drifted out into the night. She approached carefully, her hand brushing the edge of her holster, though her instincts whispered this wasn't danger. Not the kind she'd been trained for. The closer she came, the clearer the figure became. A man, wrapped in layers of torn clothing, a battered beanie clinging to his head, his beard tangled and frosted by his own breath. At his side lay a dog, thin but alert, its ribs pressing sharply beneath its coat as it lifted its head to watch her. The animal didn't growl, didn't move, just watched, with eyes far older than they should have been. Elena's boot crunched against broken glass, and the man stirred. His eyes opened, hazel under the weak glow of the streetlight, and for a moment she was caught off guard. They weren't the glazed, wandering eyes she often saw in men lost to drink or drugs. These were steady, clear, almost commanding, though softened by exhaustion. "You shouldn't be out here," Elena said gently, lowering her tone so as not to startle the dog. "It's below freezing tonight. Do you need me to call someone? A shelter?" The man gave a rasp of a laugh dry as parchment. "Shelter's full. Always is." His voice carried a weight, a kind of quiet authority that made her pause. He sat up slowly, wincing, his hand brushing the dog's back. "We're used to the cold." Elena hesitated. Something in his manner didn't fit, the posture too straight despite his rags, the diction too precise for someone long lost to the streets. He looked like a man who once wore a suit, who once stood in front of rooms where people listened when he spoke. And now here he was, shivering beneath a street lamp no one else would glance at twice. The dog licked his hand, and he whispered to it softly. She couldn't hear the words, but she felt them. Words of reassurance. Words of loyalty. The kind of words you gave when you had nothing else left to give. She cleared her throat. "I can take you somewhere warmer. Get you food. A bed for the night." She didn't add the unspoken. "And keep you alive until morning." He lifted his gaze to hers, and she felt pinned by it, as though he were searching her face for something he wasn't sure he wanted to find. Finally, he said, almost inaudible, "Not all of us are welcome in the places you think we should go." Elena frowned, kneeling slightly to his level. "What do you mean?" The man leaned closer, lowering his voice as though afraid the wind itself might betray him. "I'm not what I look like." His breath fogged in the air between them. "I can't go back. Not yet. Not until it's safe." Elena froze. Her training prickled at the edges of her mind. His words weren't the ramblings of a man delirious from cold. They were deliberate, heavy with implication. And for the first time that night, she realized this wasn't just a routine welfare check. Something larger, hidden, sat behind those tired eyes. Something that could change everything she thought she knew about the man shivering in the cold. Elena stayed crouched in the shadows of the boarded-up factory steps, her breath visible in the icy air. The man's words repeated in her mind like a refrain. "I'm not what I look like. I can't go back. Not yet. Not until it's safe." It wasn't a confession she could brush off. Not the way he said it, like a soldier choosing each word, careful, deliberate. His hand moved slowly over the dog's back, and the animal pressed closer to him, a silent sentinel. "Safe from what?" Elena asked quietly, Her tone caught somewhere between an officer's sternness and a woman's compassion. He hesitated, his lips pressing into a tight line. For a moment she thought he wouldn't answer, that he would shut himself off like so many of the homeless she had spoken to before. But then his gaze shifted past her, toward the alley's mouth, as if he were seeing something that wasn't there, or maybe someone who had once been. "You ever see a life collapse?" he said finally, his voice carrying that same rasp of old wounds. "One moment you have a home, a family, a name that matters. The next moment it's gone. Torn away." Elena swallowed. She'd heard stories before, men and women who had fallen from jobs, marriages, fortunes. But there was something different in the way he said a name that matters. "You're saying someone took it from you?" she pressed. He let out a bitter laugh, short and humorless. "More like I gave it away, trusted the wrong people. And when the storm came, they didn't just let me drown. They pushed me under." His fingers traced absent circles over the dog's matted fur. "So I stay here, where no one looks for me, where no one believes I exist anymore." The dog shifted, resting its head against his knee. Elena studied him in silence, her instincts warring. This wasn't just another case of a man down on his luck. The cadence in his words, the hint of education, the dignity that clung stubbornly to him even in rags. It all spoke of someone whose story was buried far deeper than the streets. Her radio crackled suddenly at her hip, startling the dog, who growled low in its throat. Elena pressed the button, murmured a quick, "Unit 24, all clear," then released it. The man had flinched at the sound, his shoulders tensing. His reaction was too sharp, too practiced. She recognized the look. Someone conditioned to run at the first sign of pursuit. "Listen," she said, softening her voice. "I don't know what you're hiding from, but I know the cold won't forgive you tonight. Let me at least get you something warm to eat." He shook his head. "Food won't fix this. Shelter won't fix this. You wouldn't understand." "Try me," Elena said simply. For the first time, his eyes softened, though only slightly. He studied her badge, the name etched there, and then her face really studied her as though measuring if she could be trusted with the weight he carried. At last, he whispered, "I wasn't always on the street. Once I wore the kind of uniform you wear. Different color, different authority, but the same oath." Elena felt her breath hitch. He wasn't just another lost soul. He had been someone who swore to protect, to serve. Before she could speak again, a sudden noise cracked through the alley. A bottle shattering, followed by hurried footsteps retreating into the dark. Elena spun, hand on her holster. The man's dog barked sharply, straining against its invisible leash of loyalty. Her heart pounded as the sound faded. When she turned back, the man's face had changed. The haunted weariness was still there, but beneath it was something else. Alertness, readiness, like a soldier waking from slumber. "You're not safe here either," he murmured. "Not tonight." Elena stared at him, the weight of his words sinking deeper. She had thought she was the one protecting him, but his tone made her wonder if it might be the other way around. And in that moment, the night no longer felt like a routine patrol. It felt like the beginning of a story she wasn't prepared to hear, but one she could no longer walk away from. Elena's instincts told her she should call for backup, report the disturbance, and bring this strange encounter under official protocol. But something deeper, an intuition that came not from her badge but from her humanity, made her pause. If she called it in, the man might vanish before she could understand who he really was. And despite everything she had seen in her years as an officer, she felt a pull toward him, as though his story was already tied to her own fate. She adjusted her stance, keeping one eye on the dark alley where the bottle had shattered. "Who's after you?" she asked, her voice hushed but firm. The man ran a hand over his beard, his hazel eyes flickering with memory. "It doesn't matter anymore. What matters is keeping the wrong people from finding me again." "Again?" Elena pressed. He nodded slowly. "They think I disappeared, and I let them think it. Easier than fighting. Easier than proving I was right." His jaw tightened. But sometimes the past doesn't stay buried. The dog leaned against him, and for the first time, Elena noticed a faint scar running along the man's wrist, the kind left by handcuffs or restraints. A chill passed through her. She wanted to ask more, but the wind picked up, sharp and cutting. The man's shoulders shook from the cold. Instinct overrode caution. Elena unclasped her jacket and draped it over his thin frame, ignoring his startled protest. "You'll freeze if you stay like this," she said firmly. "I'll drive you somewhere safe. No one has to know." His lips parted as though to refuse, but he stopped. He studied her again, her determination, her refusal to look away. Something softened in his eyes, as if he were remembering a time when trust hadn't cost so much. Finally, he nodded. The drive back to the precinct was quiet, broken only by the steady hum of the heater. The dog sat in the back seat, its head resting on the windowsill, watching the passing lights. Elena stole glances at the man. Even in silence, his presence was striking. There was a dignity that refused to fade, no matter how ragged his clothes. Inside the small precinct office, Elena guided him to a bench near the heater. She fetched a cup of coffee from the machine, pressing it into his hands. His fingers curled around it with surprising steadiness. "Start with your name," she said softly. He stared into the steam for a long moment before answering. "Daniel." Elena waited, sensing there was more. At last he added, "Daniel Reyes, once a captain, U.S. Army." Her eyes widened. She had suspected discipline, maybe law enforcement. But Army captain? The weight of his presence suddenly made sense. The way he scanned the room without seeming to, the way his voice carried quiet command. It was the mark of someone who had led men, made impossible choices, carried burdens no one else could see. "What happened?" she asked gently. Daniel's jaw worked. He seemed to wrestle with the words. "Afghanistan. My unit. There was an operation. Something went wrong. Reports were twisted. Men I trusted turned their backs. When the dust cleared, they needed someone to blame. I carried it." Elena's chest tightened. "You were dishonorably discharged?" He gave a bitter smile. "Worse. I was erased, stripped of everything. My rank, my reputation, my home. Even my family stopped answering the phone. Easier for them to believe the headlines than to ask questions." The silence that followed was heavy, broken only by the faint hum of the heater. Elena felt anger rising. Not at him, but at the injustice. She had seen men guilty of far worse still given a second chance. But Daniel had been cast aside, abandoned to the streets. "And all this time," she whispered, "you've just been surviving out here?" His eyes lifted to hers, steady, unwavering. Surviving, and waiting, because one day someone will need the truth. And when that day comes, I'll be ready to tell it. Before Elena could respond, the station door banged open. Another officer, Peterson, older and gruff, strode in, stopping when he saw Daniel on the bench. His eyes narrowed. "What's this, Morales?" he demanded. "Picking up strays now?" Elena straightened. He needed help. He was freezing out there. Peterson snorted. "Plenty of shelters. He doesn't belong here. You don't know who you're dealing with." But Daniel's calm voice cut through the tension. "Actually, she does." Peterson froze, recognition flickering across his face. His expression darkened. "You," he muttered. Elena glanced between them, heart quickening. "You know him?" Peterson didn't answer. He turned on his heel, muttering something under his breath, and disappeared into the back offices. Daniel set the coffee down, his eyes shadowed. "And so it begins," he said softly. Elena's pulse raced. Whatever his secret was, it had just reached into her world, and there was no turning back. The precinct seemed suddenly colder, even with the heater humming. Elena felt it in her bones, the shift from ordinary to extraordinary, from routine to dangerous. Daniel sat still, his dog curled protectively at his feet. Yet the quiet in his posture carried an edge, like a soldier waiting for orders he didn't want to hear. Elena pulled a chair closer, lowering her voice. What does Peterson know about you? Daniel's gaze didn't waver. Enough to be afraid. Enough to keep quiet, until the wrong ears demand otherwise. She frowned. Are you saying there are people inside the department who'd want to bury you too? He nodded once. Corruption isn't a uniform or a badge. It's a hunger. I stumbled on something years ago. Evidence. Files that linked contractors overseas with people in power here. I tried to report it. My career ended the next day. His lips curved bitterly. It's easier to call a man dishonored than admit you're feeding off his silence. Elena's mind raced. If he was telling the truth, then his disappearance hadn't been an accident of fate. It had been engineered. And Peterson's reaction wasn't mere distaste. It was fear. Before she could speak again, a knock came at the glass door of the precinct lobby. Hard.
Urgent.
Elena stood quickly, peering out into the street. A dark sedan idled at the curb, its windows tinted, its engine purring low. Two men in suits stood outside, their eyes scanning the room. Daniel's hand clenched around the coffee cup. They've found me. The dog growled low, sensing the danger before Elena fully grasped it. She felt her heartbeat thudding against her ribs. Who are they? She asked. Not police, Daniel said grimly. Worse, hired men. They'll smile like officials, but they're here to drag me back into silence. Elena's hand brushed her holster, but she knew a firearm wouldn't untangle the knot tightening around them. This was bigger than weapons. It was about trust, hers in him, his in her. The door creaked open. The two men stepped inside, their shoes clicking against the tile. One flashed a badge too quickly to read. The other offered a rehearsed smile. Evening, Officer Morales. The taller one said smoothly, We're here on federal business. That man, he gestured toward Daniel, is wanted for questioning. We'll be taking him into our custody. Elena glanced at Daniel. His jaw was tight, but he didn't flinch. He simply looked at her, eyes steady, as if the entire world balanced on whether she believed him. Her training told her to comply, to hand him over, to let the so-called authorities do their job. But her instincts screamed louder. Something's wrong. These men don't belong here. And if I let him go, I'll never see him again. Do you have paperwork? Elena asked coolly. The shorter man smirked. Classified. You don't need to see it. That was all the confirmation she needed. Real federal agents didn't smirk at procedure. Real federal agents didn't demand without proof. Daniel whispered, his voice low enough only she could hear. If you let them take me, the truth dies tonight. The moment cracked open like thunder. Elena stood straighter, placing herself slightly between Daniel and the men. Without proper documentation, no one leaves this precinct, she said firmly. Not on my watch. The taller man's smile faded. Officer, you're making a mistake. Maybe, Elena replied, her voice steady despite the adrenaline coursing through her veins. But it won't be tonight. The silence that followed was taut as wire. Then, without another word, the men turned and walked out, their footsteps echoing like promises of trouble yet to come. The sedan pulled away into the night. Elena exhaled shakily, only then realizing her hands had curled into fists. Daniel's dog pressed against her leg, as if sensing she needed grounding. Daniel's voice broke the silence. You just made yourself a target. Elena looked at him, her heart still pounding. Then I guess we're both in this now. For the first time, Daniel's stern expression softened into something else. Gratitude, quiet and profound. He nodded slowly, and in that fragile silence, a bond was born. Not just between an officer and a man the world had forgotten, but between two souls who had decided, against all odds, to trust each other. The night after the encounter with the suited men, Elena couldn't sleep. Every creak of the precinct walls, every car passing on the street outside, made her think of the dark sedan. She had put her career on the line by standing in their way. She knew it. Peterson knew it. And Daniel knew it most of all. Daniel didn't rest either. He sat on the bench with his dog curled by his boots, staring at the floor as though seeing the past unfold in the cracks of the tiles. Elena watched him when she thought he wouldn't notice, but he always did. His soldier's instincts were sharp even in weariness. At dawn, the city outside stirred with the metallic hum of garbage trucks and the shuffle of commuters. Elena poured herself another stale cup of coffee and turned toward him. "You said you had evidence," she said. "Do you still?" Daniel's jaw tightened. "Not here. Not anymore. But I know where." Something in his voice sent a chill through her. Not fear, something deeper. The tone of a man who carried truths no one wanted spoken. He looked at her then, and for the first time, his steady eyes carried a flicker of vulnerability. "If I go back for it, I won't make it out alive. They'll expect it. They'll be waiting. But if I don't," he trailed off. "The truth dies," Elena finished softly. Daniel nodded. Before Elena could answer, Peterson strode into the lobby, his face thunderous. "Morales," he barked. "My office. Now." She followed, her gut already braced for what was coming. Peterson slammed the door shut and leaned over his desk. "You don't know what you're messing with," he growled. "That man out there, he's radioactive. You think you're saving him? You're not. You're digging your own grave." Elena stood her ground. "Then tell me why. What do you know about him?" Peterson's jaw worked, anger battling fear. Finally, he spat. "He was supposed to disappear. Years ago. But he didn't. And if you had any sense, you'd let the men in suits finish what they started." Her stomach turned cold. So Peterson was in on it. All this time, she met his glare head-on. "Maybe I don't care about sense. Maybe I care about justice." Peterson slammed his fist on the desk, his voice a hiss. "You'll regret this, Morales." By the time she returned to the lobby, Daniel had risen, his dog at his side, as if ready to move. His eyes told her he had guessed everything from the look on her face. "They'll come again," he said simply. "And next time they won't knock." Elena's pulse thudded in her ears. "Then we don't wait. You said you know where the evidence is. We go now." Daniel studied her for a long beat. "If you walk this path with me, there's no going back. They'll strip you the same way they stripped me." She drew a slow breath. "Then I'd rather lose everything for the truth than live a lie." For a moment, neither of them spoke. Then Daniel gave a single, solemn nod, the kind a soldier gives when he recognizes a comrade. That night, under cover of darkness, they slipped into the abandoned side of the city, Daniel leading with silent confidence. His dog padded beside him, ears pricked, every sense alert. Elena followed, her heart hammering but her resolve steady. They reached a storage facility on the edge of the industrial district. The gates were rusted, the sign faded, but Daniel moved with purpose. He found a specific unit, hands trembling slightly as he fit a key into the lock. Inside, among dusty crates and forgotten boxes, Daniel unearthed a battered metal case. He knelt, brushing dirt from its surface. "Everything's here," he whispered. "The contracts, the communications, proof they sold lives for profit." But the moment he cracked it open, headlights flared outside, flooding the room with blinding white. Engines roared. Doors slammed. Voices barked orders. "They found us," Elena breathed. Daniel snapped the case shut, thrusting it into her hands. His voice was steel. "Take it. Run." She shook her head. "Not without you." "Listen to me," he barked, the old captain's authority flaring through his ragged shell. "You're the only one they don't expect. You can get this out. If they take me, it doesn't matter. Just don't let them bury the truth again." Tears burned in her eyes, but she gripped the case tighter. The dog pressed against Daniel's leg, growling at the growing shadows outside. The warehouse doors splintered as men poured in, guns drawn, shouts filling the air. Daniel turned to her, his voice softer now. "I've been running for years, Morales. Maybe it's time I stop. But you can finish this." Her heart wrenched. "Daniel!" But before she could say more, he pushed her toward a back exit, the dog bolting with her, loyal even in chaos. The last thing she saw before she stumbled into the alley was Daniel standing tall in the glare of headlights. His shoulders squared, his voice ringing like thunder as he faced the men who had hunted him for years. A soldier unbroken, and for the first time in years he wasn't hiding anymore. The night cracked open with gunfire and shouts, echoing through the empty industrial streets. Elena stumbled into the shadows of the alley, the metal case clutched to her chest, the dog pressed against her legs as if guiding her forward. Her lungs burned, but she didn't stop. Not until the chaos behind her faded into distance, swallowed by the city's darkness. She ducked into a narrow side street, her heart hammering. The dog stayed close, panting, its eyes sharp and unafraid. She crouched, brushing its ears with trembling fingers. "We can't let them take this," she whispered. "We can't let his sacrifice mean nothing." At dawn, Elena walked into the district courthouse with the battered case in her hands. She had not slept, had not changed out of her uniform, her eyes bloodshot but burning with purpose. Judges, clerks, and officials turned their heads as she marched past them, every step echoing against marble floors. By midday, the documents inside Daniel's case were on a federal desk. Real federal, this time, not the false badges from the night before. Names, contracts, transfers of money that stained pages like blood. Proof undeniable, woven together with Daniel's meticulous care. The storm came fast. News anchors blared headlines of corruption and betrayal. High-ranking contractors and government officials were led away in handcuffs. Investigations spread like wildfire. For once, silence couldn't bury the truth. But for Elena, victory tasted bitter without Daniel standing beside her. Days turned into weeks. No word of him surfaced. Not in hospitals, not in jails. It was as though the man had vanished into smoke. Then, one evening, as she left the courthouse after testifying, she saw a figure leaning against the far wall. The dog spotted him first, sprinting forward with a joyous bark. Elena's heart lurched. Daniel stood there, tired, thinner, but alive. His hazel eyes caught hers, and for the first time, there was no shadow in them, only light. "You should be dead," she whispered, tears springing to her eyes. He smiled faintly. "I almost was, but some debts are hard to collect, even for them. Guess I got one more chance." She stepped closer, unable to stop herself, her hands gripping his arms as if to anchor him. "You don't have to hide anymore," she said. "The truth is out. You're free." Daniel's eyes softened. "Freedom's a strange thing, Morales. I thought I lost it years ago. Turns out I just needed someone brave enough to believe me again." The dog pressed between them, tail wagging furiously. Elena laughed through her tears, bending to hug its shaggy neck. When she stood again, Daniel was watching her with quiet gratitude, the kind that went deeper than words. In the months that followed, Daniel's name was cleared. The dishonor erased, his service restored in the record books. He never sought fame or spotlight. All he wanted was peace, a chance to live with dignity. Elena helped him find housing, helped him reconnect with his estranged sister, who wept when she learned the truth of his years in exile. And through it all, Elena stayed by his side. What began as duty grew into something stronger. Trust, friendship, and in time, a bond neither of them had expected. They were two people who had walked through fire, finding each other in the ashes. One spring afternoon, as the city bloomed with warmth, Elena sat with Daniel and his loyal dog at a small park bench. Children laughed in the distance. For the first time in years, Daniel's shoulders no longer carried the weight of invisible battles. "You know," he said softly, "the streets taught me something the army never could. That strength isn't just standing tall. Sometimes it's letting someone stand beside you." Elena smiled, her eyes glistening. "And sometimes, it's believing in someone the world gave up on." He reached down, scratching behind the dog's ears. "Funny, isn't it? They tried to erase me. But in the end, it was compassion that wrote me back into the world." Elena rested her hand over his, their fingers brushing. Compassion changes everything. And as the sunlight spilled across the park, warming the scars of the city and the scars of their lives. Elena knew the truth Daniel had been waiting to prove wasn't just about corruption or betrayal. It was about something greater, something the streets had tried to bury but could never destroy. The truth that no one is ever truly lost if someone is willing to see them. Elena did not expect the city to remember him. Men like Daniel weren't supposed to reappear after being erased. Yet, when the story broke, the brave officer who uncovered a buried scandal through the testimony of a forgotten veteran, people began to talk. Newspapers carried his name again, not as a disgraced soldier but as a man who had refused to let truth die. Veterans groups reached out, holding vigils in his honor. Old comrades, who had once doubted, wrote letters asking forgiveness. The precinct felt it too. Some officers avoided Elena, unwilling to admit they had looked the other way. Others, quieter and humbler, thanked her for not letting him vanish. Peterson, stripped of his badge for his part in the silence, left with no ceremony. Elena did not rejoice in his downfall, but she carried no regret. Justice had its price, and truth had demanded it. For Daniel, healing came slowly. Years on the streets had left scars deeper than the ones on his wrists. Crowded rooms made him tense. Sudden noises made his dog bark until Daniel calmed him with a hand. He carried memories of nights when no one spoke his name, when the cold pavement was his only companion. Yet in those moments, Elena stayed beside him, her presence like a steady light that never flickered. The dog became something of a symbol too. Neighbors in the block where Daniel lived started calling him Justice, because wherever Daniel walked, the loyal animal followed like a shadow of truth that could not be silenced. Children would pet him in the park, and Daniel, once invisible, found himself smiling more than he thought possible. Elena noticed the changes in him, how he began shaving again, how he bought a second-hand suit for the hearing that cleared his record, how, in time, he no longer looked over his shoulder at every corner. He carried dignity now, but not the brittle kind of pride from before his fall. Something humbler, gentler, born from gratitude. And Elena herself changed too. She found her work no longer felt like routine patrols or endless paperwork. Every night on duty, every call answered, carried the memory of Daniel's hazel eyes the night he whispered, "I can't go back. Not until it's safe." She had made it safe. Together, they had made it safe. Months later, Daniel was asked to speak at a community gathering for homeless outreach. At first, he refused. He said he wasn't a speaker anymore, that his story was nothing but broken glass. But Elena pressed his hand and whispered, "People need to hear what compassion can do. You've lived it." So he stood before the crowd, nervous at first, his dog lying faithfully at his feet. His voice shook, then steadied as he spoke of what it meant to lose everything, and to be seen again. He told them not about shame but about survival, not about despair but about the power of one person's belief to pull another from the shadows. When he finished, the room stood in silence, then applause rose like thunder. Daniel bowed his head, tears running freely, and for the first time in years, he wept without shame. Afterward, as the crowd dispersed, Elena slipped her arm through his. "See, you never really disappeared. The world just needed to remember." Daniel looked at her, his voice low and steady. "No, you remembered me first. And because you did, I remembered myself." In the years that followed, Daniel became more than a name restored. He became a mentor to young veterans, a volunteer at shelters, a man whose scars became maps for others finding their way out of the dark. Elena remained his constant, their bond growing into something deep and unspoken, forged not in romance's fever but in loyalty's fire. Some called it love, others called it friendship beyond measure. For Elena and Daniel, it was simply family, the kind you choose, the kind you never abandon. On quiet evenings, they would sit on that same park bench, the dogs sprawled at their feet, the city's noise softened by the glow of street lamps. Daniel would watch the skyline and say, "Funny, I thought my life ended when they stripped everything from me. But maybe it was only beginning." And Elena would answer, her voice warm, "Sometimes the coldest nights lead us to the brightest dawn." the message spread beyond them. In schools, churches, precincts, and shelters, people spoke of the officer who saw a man in rags and refused to see only what the world told her. Of the soldier who lost his name but reclaimed his truth. Their story became a living reminder that no one is ever just what they appear to be. That compassion can unlock secrets the world tries to bury. In the end, Daniel's greatest victory wasn't clearing his name or toppling corruption. It was standing once more in the light, beside the officer who believed in him, proving to himself and the world that even in the coldest streets, hope can survive. And to anyone who listened, the story left its mark. Never turn away from those the world has forgotten, because sometimes the secret they carry is not of shame, but of courage waiting to be seen.